I've recently set about answering some of the beginner's questions that pop up over and over again in wargaming. Actually, this time even veteran players might get some useful ideas. The question this time comes in bolt action and the fact that you always have to take a lieutenant in any type of platoon. The lieutenant has a few options, has a few abilities, so at first you can easily be confused by what to do with them, but eventually come to the conclusion that there's actually quite a few ways to use your LT. So hi, I'm ED-SKaR and I'm here to answer the question, what is the best way to run your LT? I did post this on Reddit and started a little discussion going, and my first few ideas were expanded upon by others who I will try to credit as I go along. My first idea is following on the idea that you must take an LT, you have to, you usually can't get out of it, and so if you just spend the absolute minimum number of points on them, you can use those points elsewhere for the units you actually want to bring. So we can take a second or junior LT with no assistance, inexperienced, and this one model comes out to 35 points. That's great, we only spent 35 points on our LT, one model that can just be tucked away and forgotten about. So how would you actually use this officer? Well, if the mission you're playing has a bonus for taking out enemy officers, then yes, you hide them in cover and go down repeatedly. You could have this LT running around between your units who have pins to give them leadership bonus, and if the LT gets hit themselves, they were only 35 points, who cares? I call this the leadership bonus LT. Bjornthuf mentions the Plinker LT. Give them a rifle and let them take pot shots at the enemy, although this use might actually benefit from some assistance and upgrading to regular. Yolfeldy brought up the Gunner Lieutenant, which they say can only be used with the British Universal Carrier, but actually can be used on any transport vehicle with more than one gun. The first gun on a transport always gets used by the crew, but the rest of them have to be used by the transported models on board. And so if we're going to hide our model away, we may as well hide them in a Universal Carrier, or an M3 half-track, or a Hanomag, or any other transport with multiple MGs, and they can fire the extras. Again, upgrading to regular to get rid of that -1 to hit for being inexperienced would be helpful. Mineral Water suggested an artillery officer in a list where you have an artillery piece and possibly some other long-range firepower like sniper, anti-tank rifles, similar stuff like that. You put all the guns together and use your officer in the middle to snap them all at once to get the best opportunity to take out a specific enemy target. You might want to upgrade to a first or senior lieutenant for an extra snap, Germans get one for free, if you have enough guns to make that relevant. The second sort of way to use a lieutenant is to take more advantage of the various bonuses that your lieutenant brings to units nearby. Having some assistance on all with rifles gives them a lot of utility, so let's talk that through. And especially I will note that if you take one assistant, you retain the small team bonus, giving your opponent -1 to hit you. But taking two assistants, you lose this bonus. I think that a lot of players put too much emphasis on this, and you see the 2 model LT far more often, where 3 or 1 models would be more appropriate. However, as this type of LT will end up under fire a lot, more often than any other type, having that bonus might be helpful here. Beaches 155 and Playful Vacation 754 suggested similar variations to this with submachine guns. As they'll be keeping up with advancing infantry, they can help soften up enemy units closer range. Rowan Oathsword 21 suggested German officer, variant with Sturmgewehr, bit more versatile but serving the same role. Samus the Clown suggests tagging a medic along. I personally find medics to be not that useful, I find them quite finicky to use, but if you can make use of them, that's certainly a valid option. Mr. Zakaul suggests for US and Finns, with their moving and shooting bonuses in various forms, that again keeping up with the infantry and handing out the pins is quite viable. But if we think this through and we realise that we do have to take an LT, surely they're supposed to be in command, but if they get taken out, you don't actually suffer anything unless the mission specifically mentions that. Well, we might as well use them with all of the upgrades that they can take, particularly in terms of the choice of weapon, for no additional points. For most infantry, you pay 3 points for one model to go from a rifle to a submachine gun, which means the submachine gun is better, right? Well, not always, and for the Plinker officer that we mentioned earlier, the extra range of a rifle is much handier. But if we were to give our lieutenant 2 assistants, and all of them with submachine guns, that's not a lot of extra points over the minimum, and we have ourselves a nice little assault squad. And we can pay not a lot of points for a jeep, staff car, Kubelwagen, Kuragane or something similar to shift them around the battlefield quickly. This can get them right into the thick of fighting right when it's needed, offering leadership bonus and snaps, and those 3 submachine guns at point blank if needed. This can really turn the tide, and it's not to be sniffed at. Or you can specifically target enemy small teams with this type of lieutenant. Snipers, mortars, artillery, and anything that would be upset by a close range volley from all that firepower. Brian Actual mentions the fanatical German SS rules that makes them very good at that sort of raid, and Lord Marino points out that you can use this type of mobile officer to snag an objective, waiting for your infantry to catch up if needed. We can actually extend this, and the previous role as well, to really put your lieutenant as the crux of your tactics. Instead of just a staff car, give them a light armoured carrier. Universal carrier, SDKFZ 250, auto protetto, whatever. Give them 2 assistants with submachine guns and they become very dangerous in their own right for jumping into assaults, taking out small teams and that sort of thing. But also, get a squad of infantry on a bigger armoured carrier, or just a truck to save some points, yeah, that's fine too, and an armoured car to support them, and maybe a light tank with tank riders if your faction has that option, and even if it doesn't bring the light tank anyway. Bring a full 500 points of aggressive, close range, handful of dice, highly mobile units to get stuck into your opponent's deployment zone and just say, well, that's your problem now, what are you going to do about it? Jason Station pointed out, and Porthos63 confirmed, that the officer gives his leadership bonus for when units are off the board if the officer is also off the board, and that can be very handy in getting lots of units on at the same time. Nodskuv presented a wonderfully cheesy way of combining an officer and 2 anti-tank teams to take out a recce vehicle, snapping the first into ambush and the second into fire. If the vehicle recces, they get ambushed by the first, and if not, they get fired on by the second. This discussion, of course, wanders off into various national traits, both army-wide and officer-specific, that give little boosts to the performance of how an LT will behave in certain ways. Now, I think that all of these can be very useful, but just like the small team bonus, you shouldn't be locked into thinking that the bonus is always a bonus and you should always use it, but rather take advantage of them when that advantage is advantageous for you, when it is useful for what you want to do with it. Now, the most obvious of the national traits is the Germans' extra snap and leadership, plenty useful for rolling up with the infantry, looking after heavy weapons or that sort of thing, and especially heading up an armoured assault. Being able to snap 2 or even 3 units at once can be very powerful. Also, the Sturmgewehr is like a submachine gun, but with more range, bridging the gap between submachine gun and rifle. The Americans, and Finns as well, get sort of a boost because they can move and shoot with their rifles, or the Finns kind of advancing into ambush, giving them a little more range than would otherwise be the case with the rifle when they want to hand out pins. The Japanese officer has the option to take both a rifle and a sword at the same time, giving them all of the range and the edge, lol, in close combat, in a single loadout. There's also more campaign-specific or theatre selector options for other LT bonuses. Dr. DH posted about the Brit Commandos getting up to 5 models to make a much bigger squad than normal. Now, it would take the rest of the year to fully compile a list of every single little possibility, so I'll just stop here and say again that bonuses are very useful when they're useful. Don't be locked into using them, but certainly take advantage of them when they are advantageous. There are plenty of ways to run officers, hopefully I have proven that, and none of them are the best as such, but rather the lieutenant is possibly the most versatile unit, which is handy because you're forced to take one. Whether you want to take a totally minimal 35-point lieutenant tax, hide them in cover around a corner, an officer with 1 assistant for a small team bonus with rifles to blink away at the enemy when they're wandering across open ground, but also to give bonuses to your own infantry on the way in, or to give up 3 model submachine guns on transport at the head of a whole armoured column. These are all viable options, and they should all see some time on your gaming table soon, just to see what they're like if nothing else. But I think my favourite was Captured Joe's suggestion of a Sergeant Major. Now you see, if you take a senior lieutenant with 1 rifle-armed assistant, naturally the officer has his pistol, as is proper. He has much too much on his hands already, like pointing with his free hand whilst striking an inspiring pose, to bother with anything as complex as a long gun. He is always accompanied by his experienced Sergeant Major, who aids his commander with a healthy dose of common sense and medium-range firepower. The script, of course, says that he dies first. I shall leave a link in the description to the Reddit post if you want to read up on my whole post or join into the comments going on there. And of course you can add your comments to this YouTube video as well, that would be much appreciated. And I will also point out that my original post was well liked enough by Chicago Dice that they featured it on their blog, so I guess I'll link that as well. Otherwise, please do share this video out to anyone who'd be interested in the various ways to run an officer in bolt action. But for now, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.